The Evil Thin is a franchise that, much like the Amazing Digital Circus that I covered in the last video, I haven't had much of an excuse or reason to talk about much. Like with that show, none of my friends have played through the Evil Thin games, so it's been a series that's been very near and dear to me that I've sort of had to just sit on. So today, I thought it would be fun to discuss and do a more normal video ranking simply the chapters of the first Evil Thin game, from my least favorite to my favorite. Before I get into the video itself, I just want to address some of the comments I received in my last video on the Amazing Digital Circus. So first of all, thank you a ton for all the positive feedback. There were several requests for more Amazing Digital Circus content, so I will be attempting to do a tier list or discussion video on the Amazing Digital Circus every other video of this type until I run out of topics to discuss in that, because it seems like there was a lot of enjoyment from that. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I love talking about it, so it's a win-win for me. So again, thank you all so much for the comments, kind words, and even some of the negative words and feedback you guys posted up there. It still helps out the video, it boosts the algorithm, and while some of it was just like, video sucks, even that I still appreciate because it helps the algorithm. But if you had like feedback that was negative, that there was things you didn't like, I appreciate those as well, because I'm always trying to figure out how I can do these better. So any and all feedback of that variety is appreciated. Just please do your best to be respectful when you're doing it. And on that topic, some of the negative feedback I was receiving in the last video about the Amazing Digital Circus was in regards to me summarizing the topic of the show and abstraction, and, in their opinion, wasting time on that. And that is a fair and valid point that I am fully aware that most people watching my video on a specific topic won't need that. However, I have one friend in particular that watches almost all of my content, even when he doesn't know anything about the topic. And it means a ton to me that he does that and comments on things and gives me feedback. So I want to make it so that his viewing experience can be as informed and enjoyable as possible whenever he's watching some of these videos, even if he doesn't know anything about it. So that's why I include timestamps in my description. I have the chapters as well, where if you hover over the timeline, you'll just see the video broken up into the various segments for the chapters for each of the things. And I also include a on-screen timestamp that people can see that'll tell them where they can skip ahead to skip the preamble, because I want to make it so that if you don't want to hear that, you can get right into the video. But for my buddy Seth Rennick, so thank you so much for watching my stuff, by the way. It means the world to me that you're being this active with my content. I want to make sure that he is always having the full experience with anything I put out. So that's why I'm doing that. We are now going to just jump into ranking of each of the chapters. This will be in descending order, so my first one I talk about will be my least favorite, and then the last one will be my favorite. Last up on the list of chapters for me has to be Chapter 12. So, Chapter 12 is a somewhat short chapter that is honestly just really dumb. And it really reminds you that you're in a video game in a bad way that takes you out of it. So, in this chapter, you get on a bus, and a giant enemy crab, Ergot, basically, attacks you, but does an absolutely horrible job at doing it. He's this massive monster that could easily tip the bus over, or anything like that, but I genuinely don't know how he could do worse at his job. All he does is he rips the roof off, and then slowly raises one of his massive claws to occasionally try and poke you. He could easily ram it, flip the bus, fall on top of it. Like, he has a plethora of options. He's as fast as, or even faster than the bus as well, but he just does nothing intelligent, which, again, for me, really takes me out of it. It's also just really boring, because he's just a stationary target that you shoot a bunch, and then he drops some of these worm-like things that you can just stomp on that'll drop ammo, and then you just shoot him again until you go to the next segment where he like disappears because you go through a tunnel or something. Then you do something, and then he comes back, and then you shoot him until he disappears again, and then your buddy gets shot, and then you gotta go find medicine for him on a bridge that's got enemies on it, which is honestly the most interesting part, but still, as far as this game goes, pretty boring, because usually the game has very interesting environments that you're exploring as you're dealing with all the enemies that are in the game, and it gives you a lot of creative ways to approach how you want to fight the enemies. But it's just this bridge, so it's just like a straight, narrow. There's some cars you can go behind for cover, but it is extremely linear in its progression and does not reward you for exploring or anything like the other chapters do. So overall, for me, this is just the worst chapter of the game by far. Overall, one of the few chapters, in my opinion, that really doesn't do anything good or interesting, and it's just sort of like a chore to get through. Next chapter we're talking about is chapter 8. Now, this is a really, really short chapter where nothing happens at all. The only thing you have is crawling through this weird little cave that is linear in nature. There's no exploration to be had. You're just going through a maze, squeezing through little tight, narrow passageways, which, you know, is the only thing that really prolongs it, I feel like. And fighting these split-face enemies. There is a section where the walls are shooting harpoons and you just run to cover and wait to cross, but it's just pretty boring. There's also that kind of jank run sequence where you're running down a hall with the big amalgam monster behind you but like if you bump into anything, he kills you and you gotta restart the running section. And the camera angle and the controls for it are not great. So it's just really boring. Luckily, though, the only thing that for me that kept it below number 12 was just the fact that it's very short, so it's not that much of a chore to get through. Like, you can get it done really quickly. There aren't any puzzles that are long and tedious, so you have to slog through either. So again, it's just snooze fest, but at least it's a quick one that you just get through and it's over with, and then that's it. Next up, we have, regrettably, the final chapter. So, the final chapter of The Evil Within is kind of all over the place, and whilst there are some really cool lore things that explain away some of the issues I have with it, I understand the reason for some of it, it's extremely video gamey and actiony. And like I said, there is a legitimate reason for some of that. That being that Ruvik has left STEM, and now Sebastian has more direct influence over the collapsing STEM system. So that's why, you know, there's the stuff like with the giant, how he imagines defeating the final boss. You know, the Ruvik is this giant amalgam boss, so it basically conjures one for him to fight, and that's why there's all the ridiculous shit that happens during it. Like, you get on a fucking AMV and or whatever, they're like an armored vehicle, you know, and you have the machine gun that you're shooting while it's flying through the air, and then you land and a rocket conveniently lands next to you that you shoot and blow them up. It's very contrived, but for me, I've always sort of viewed that as because Ruvik has left, now Sebastian has more direct influence over it, so he's sort of inadvertently twisting things to end out in his favor. That's why the rocket lands next to him, because that's him exerting a little bit of control subconsciously. But A, that is just my personal theory. I don't even know if that's true. And B, that still doesn't make it less gamey and less just, why are we doing this, you know? It feels like it is trying really hard to beat this final level, right? Where they have these horde encounters back to back to back that are just really generic and uninspired, where you're in this small arena with nothing to interact with. There's just enemies spawning and you're running around the arena. And then, yeah, like I said, the final boss fight is just, it feels really out of place in this game. Every other boss fight in the game, whilst is weird and many times mutated, it's not, it still has roots in horror. This is just basically a weird, gross kaiju. That's basically all it is, as far as I'm concerned anyways. So, for me, it just doesn't really do anything super interesting. And in a lot of ways, it kind of actively undermines the mood and the feel of the entire game, because it is the final chapter. So there's nothing beyond that point. So for me, it's a really not great ending as far as gameplay goes to the story. That said, I do like the ending of the game a lot. I absolutely love when you wake up and you leave and you see Leslie walking away from the hospital, but he doesn't have the normal scared, shambly sort of walk that Leslie has, but you see that he has the confident stride of Ruvik. And for me, that is a chef's kiss. It begs for us to learn more and have a follow-up. And maybe if we're lucky someday, we will get more. Because as far as the game goes, Ruvik won. He did what he wanted to. He found the perfect vessel. He took over Leslie's body, and he managed to escape STEM, even though he was just a brain that was supposed to be trapped and forced to run STEM forever. So, it's a very, very good ending, in my opinion. Very sad for Leslie, of course, but that's, you know, nature of the beast, I guess. Next up, we are on Chapter 11. So, the main problems I have with Chapter 11 is there are a lot of these annoying swimming sections. There's also these really annoying stealth sections where you can't use your weapon or else the building goes boom because of the gas in there. And then there's also this really frustrating on-rails shooter section. So overall, there really isn't much I like about this chapter outside of, I will admit, the design of the monster in the water is really cool. And some of the conceptual things I enjoy, like the gas stealth section as a concept, I think is cool. I just don't like the implementation of it. It just made it tedious rather than interesting because it's just very slow because there are a lot of enemies in it that you can't stealth kill that just patrol where you need to go, and you have to very slowly turn a wheel, which just takes forever when you start turning it, and then you gotta like stop and try to hide and wait for them to leave. Like, it's just very tedious, right? It also doesn't have a very scary setting. It's just Bright City, you know, which isn't a bad thing, to be clear. Like, it's not having a setting in like a bright city isn't inherently bad. If they do interesting things with it. As you'll see in some of the future chapters I talk about, I think they do a lot more with the bright city, like broken city sections. They do a lot more interesting things with it, in my opinion. Whilst the water is, from a conceptual standpoint, interesting, it mechanically is just very boring. You're just waiting for the thing to go away, and then swimming to the platform, and then getting onto it, and then rinse and repeat till you escape the area. Occasionally, you'll shoot down a body that will lead it away, and then you swim, but that's it. Nothing too exciting to me. So, that said, it's not, like, egregious or anything. Like, there's nothing super, bad about the chapter. I just find it boring and tiresome at times, but it's still overall enjoyable for the most part. I just think there's more wrong with it than good. So it's like a 5 out of 10 for me. Like, it's average, I would say. Chapter 14. It's short and sweet level with a cool boss, you know, but there's not really a ton going on here. You're just sort of going through a flooded subway station, avoiding lightning, zappy puzzle things, killing some occasional solo enemies that show up, but they aren't a threat at all, really. But the main thing that puts this chapter above the ones before it is just that I actually do enjoy the invisible tentacle stalker monster that leads to the boss fight at the end. This is the part where I would say that I enjoy the chapters more than I dislike them, so they're at like a 6 out of 10 or better at this point, type of thing. Again, it is a pretty short chapter, so there's not a ton going on, and not a ton to really talk about. Like I said, the main thing is I just really like that there's a boss fight, and that puts it above. Next up, we have Chapter 1. This is a great chapter, in my opinion. What I really like about this chapter is it immediately teaches you the vibes of the game. So after you have your initial segment where you're in the hospital and then you get knocked unconscious, you wake up dangling while there's this butcher type enemy that's like chopping up meat in the background. You get a knife and you can see that he has his back to you, and when you approach him, there's a prompt to go for like a sneak kill or a stealth kill on him. So your immediate thoughts are, oh, okay, I get it, I got a knife, let me go sneak kill this guy so I can take the key from him. And so you go up, you go for the stealth kill, and you're like, oh, hell yeah. And then he doesn't die, and he just turns around, gets angry, and completely eviscerates you. And I think that does an amazing job setting the tone that this isn't your actions, you know, this isn't like those other games where you're this badass hero that's gonna run around. You're not Solid Snake stealth killing everybody. You are a normal guy in a situation trying to make the best of it. And you have to be patient, you have to be smart, you can't just try to kill everything you come across. I absolutely love the bit of tone setting that does. So overall, the chapter, there is no combat at all in it, which is one of the reasons why it is like lower on my list. Just that for replayability, it isn't as good, because a lot of it is the first time you experience it, doing a lot of cool heavy lifting, a lot of really fun cutscenes happening where you're seeing like the city just literally shifting and moving whilst you have the world's best fucking ambulance driver on your hands, by the way. Like, he is dodging and swerving and avoiding hazards like a freaking NASCAR pro driver. Like, it's incredible, honestly. So, like I said, I really like this chapter. The only thing that holds it back is just that because there's no combat or anything, it isn't as fun on replayability. So, that's why it is here. Next up, we have Chapter 2. This is a great follow-up to the intro. It gives you some moderately open areas to explore and to tackle, and the way you best see fit, and also sort of sets the tone for how the game is going to be going forward. Most of the areas you come across are either going to be these linear areas with like something that is like a boss or like a special encounter that like running away from an enemy or stuff like that, or it's going to be these open segments that have enemies scattered throughout, and you're exploring, finding supplies, and trying to defeat the enemies in the way that you think is best. You can be gung-ho and just lure enemies, away from one another one at a time, and then, kill them that way. You can sneak around and do stealth kills. There's a lot of environmental things you can have enemies like walk into and die on their own traps and stuff like that. There is a lot of fun ways to explore and tackle the situation, and this does a great job of setting the stage for that. If you're patient and resourceful, you can clear out all of the enemies in this chapter with using little or even zero ammo at all, and you can come out ahead with a ton of resources that will honestly just carry you throughout the early levels. And the reason why this one isn't as high up is there's not a ton of like cool spectacle. Like, the set pieces is pretty straightforward. It is open and wide and has lots of sort of areas you can go around enemies, but there's not really a ton going on. But it does, again, do a great job of lightly escalating the danger levels in a mostly fair way, whilst giving you the means to fight back, and again setting the expectation that a lot of the set pieces going forward you'll be able to explore it and tackle in your preferred method, which I think is great level design. So, next up we have Chapter 6, and boy howdy, was this mission a nightmare on Akuma. That said, it's a pretty fun level with lots of cool set pieces and a lot of interesting set pieces you wouldn't really be able to see in other settings, but because of the nature of STEM, you get to see a wide variety. So rather than your straightforward buildings, cities, and whatnot, you have these interesting, ruins would be the simplest way to describe it, that you bounce back and forth between. My main issue with the level is just that it's not really scary in any way, shape, or form, and feels more like a chapter in an action game than a survival horror one. You have the burning house of the building where you're keeping Joseph safe while he's unlocking these honestly comically complicated and complex doors that it doesn't even really make sense that he's able to open because they have all these weird ass mechanical parts on them. Then you have the dog section, you have the giants and the mazes, you have saving Joseph from the guillotine. These are all fun individual set pieces that don't really make sense as to how they'd all be in the same chapter normally, but that's one of the strengths of the nonsensical setting of STEM, is that it's able to put all of these discoherent and jumbled set pieces into one coherent chapter, and it makes sense that you're bouncing back and forth between because of it taking advantage of the unique setting that the Evil Within has to offer. That said, I simply wish they weren't all just, again, in broad daylight, which, like I said before, isn't always, isn't a deal breaker, but it does inherently just make them not scary, and that isn't an issue on its own, but when the set pieces are in broad daylight and they're also so very clearly action focused rather than survival or scare factor focused, then it does sort of feel a little bit out of place to me. That said, though, it is still very fun to do, so even if it is a little out of place, it is an enjoyable chapter to play through. Chapter 9, nice for those of you that noticed, is a pretty fun and cool chapter. It is all self-contained within this manor. Very akin, for like a lot of people have pointed out, to Resident Evil 1. You have this giant manor full of puzzles and enemies and insta-kill traps, some of which are a bit annoying, to be fair, but it's this cool chapter where you're exploring this manor, solving puzzles, finding keys to take to other sections of the manor, and you are just exploring at your own leisure, but there is this constant reminder that you're somewhere you're not supposed to be. So you realize pretty quickly that you are in Ruvik's home, like childhood home manor, and he does not like that you're here. So he, over the course of the game, he has shown up and sort of like tried to kill you indirectly by like summoning hordes of enemies to deal with you. He hasn't really taken you seriously up to this point, but in chapter 9, because you're in his house, he is angry and he shows up and actively tries to kill you several times, and you have to run away from him. And sometimes you can hide from him, but in my experience, it's usually not worth it, because there's a chance that if you hide in a closet or under a bed, he'll know where you are and just insta-kill you. And that's what happens if he gets close, is you instantly die. You cannot fight back against him. If you try to shoot him, the bullets phase right through him, and they just do nothing. You have to run. So that sort of creates this sort of atmosphere of, okay, I need to take my time and be careful, because there's all of these horrible traps that I could stumble into and die if I'm not careful. But if I take too long, he's gonna show back up again, and he might kill me. So I need to you need to be panically hurrying whilst being cautious. So it's a very cool atmosphere. Some of the puzzles are a bit simple, to be fair, and not that hard to figure out, but they're still interesting and cool. And again, it's just I like the atmosphere a lot. It's very survival horror. It's very interesting. I like that there's a lot of lore happening that explains a bit more of what's going on here. Overall, I just think it's a very fun chapter that has a cool narrative and a very interesting structure set up to it. So that's why Chapter 9 is just high up for me. Chapter 7. This is a chapter that I feel like many of you would probably have ranked higher, maybe even as your number 1. But for me, this is obviously pretty close to the top. I think it's a great chapter. Very few complaints with it whatsoever. So the Keeper is a very cool enemy design. There's also some cool lore implications. Like, that's one of the things I like about this game, is the enemies aren't just, it's kind of like Silent Hill, where all the enemies aren't just monsters. They look the way they do for a specific lore reason. And I'm not going to go into all the reasons for all the characters and whatnot, but I just think it's very, it's very cool. Whereas unlike with Resident Evil, where they're just zombies and mutated monsters, the enemies here are monsters for a reason. But my only complaints with this level, really, is just in the section where you're fighting the Keeper, you have like some cool fights with him, and then after that, there are these sections where there's this gas that is seeping through that you have to like find these wheels to turn to like lower the gas levels, whilst he's sort of around and trying to interrupt you and hit you and stuff. And it's not a bad design choice at all. I just find it a little bit tedious at times. But again, I think it is a great design thing. It really makes it the encounter much more stressful. But it can just be a little bit annoying, especially on repeat playthroughs, once you kind of already know the gimmick ahead of time. But otherwise, the chapter is really, really cool. The setting is great. You're in like full-on abandoned ruins type of thing. And it's almost, Indiana Jones style, with all these traps and hazards you gotta look out for. There aren't a ton of enemies, but each of the encounters with enemies, I think, are pretty well set up, so they don't feel annoying or anything like that. It's just, there's not much to say about it. It's just that there's other chapters that I like more, but this is like a solid like 8 out of 10 chapter. Next up, we have Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is a very cool set piece that a lot of people have compared to Resident Evil 4's village initial set piece, which I don't fully get. I get where they're coming from, but they're very different in their approach to me. A lot of people, when this game came out, did really try to just say it was a ripoff of Resident Evil and Resident Evil 4 in particular, and it really feels like they have to be like reaching and stretching like Olympic athlete or something to address that as well. So sure, in Chapter 3 you have this open town setting, but in Resident Evil 4, when you come across the open town setting, you are thrust into just this horde sequence that you go into a building, a cutscene plays out, which you don't have to have the cutscene play out, but 99% of players will have that happen, and it plays out the exact same way for most people. When you first do it, you're just trying to hold back the horde and stall for time. This is very different. You have this open town, and it is full of inhabitants, but they don't all just swarm on you when you alert one. They're in their own areas, and they don't like go out of their way to get you, like hunt you down if you kill. If you loudly kill one in one building, they don't just run across the street to get to you. So each little section of the city has its own little puzzle for you to figure out how you want to take it on. It's fun to explore and tailor your approach to the playstyle that you sort of naturally probably created in Chapter 2. There's a lot of resources to use. There's traps, again, that you can use to kill the enemies with their own stuff. And then at the end, there is a fight with the Psycho Butcher from Chapter 1 that is both fun and cathartic, since he was the boogeyman for you in that first chapter, and many people likely would have tried to stealth kill him only to get murdered brutally by him. So it is a bit cathartic to take him down. Overall, it is just a very, very fun open chapter that you can take on how you want. And then the final section of it is this sort of hectic, fast-paced, you're fighting off a bunch of enemies, and this sadist is what he's called, I believe, that is chasing you down, and you have to kill him. You can't run from him. You have to take him down, but there's all sorts of tools in the environment you can use to help you. It's very cool. Excellent game design, in my opinion, and just a solid, probably maybe 8.5, close to 9 out of 10. Next up, we have Chapter 13. Now, Chapter 13 is one of those types of chapters I alluded to earlier. It takes place in the Bright City, but what this chapter does that some of the other chapters didn't do as well, in my opinion, is that the environments itself feel much more inhospitable. You go into these buildings that have all sorts of these horrific traps, like this acid drip trap that if you step over, melts your fucking face. That shit is nightmare fuel to imagine to me. You have this scene where you're walking through the kitchen with these Roombas of doom. I'll see if I can find a clip of that, because it is so hilarious, and honestly one of my favorite little set pieces in general of the whole game, even if it is a little silly. You also have the reappearance of the Keeper as a threat that keeps you on your toes as you're exploring the buildings within. And that is also part of what makes this chapter feel more in line with the tone of the game as a whole, is that, sure, whilst you're in the city, you're exploring buildings inside rather than the streets. So it's not always super bright where you're at, and it creates, a more inhospitable atmosphere, in my opinion. Honestly, just in general, all of its encounters are fun and tense. There's not really any encounters that overstay their welcome. They all, again, have that wideness to the level design that lets you sort of explore and take on the encounters the way you want to. Some encounters with the Keeper again, which is great. He's a very cool enemy, so it's fun to see him come back again. And the chapter itself is on the slightly shorter side, which for some people might be a downside, but it means that there's no stinkers. The entire chapter is just cool and good and fun. And while there isn't really anything that super stands out as this is amazing, everything about it is just solid across the board. So it's just a complete good package, in my opinion. Next up, we have Chapter 5, and Chapter 4 are pretty interchangeable. And I'm gonna be honest, these levels have a bunch of different areas with the different enemy types and set pieces. You know, they do a good job letting you take them on and use the traps and the environment to your advantage. But they place this high for one reason, and one reason alone for me. Reborn Laura is one of my all-time favorite enemy designs in any game, period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Might even be my favorite enemy in any horror game ever. Her encounters, for me, are absolutely fucking spectacular. In Chapter 5, I put Chapter 5 below Chapter 4, and we'll discuss this chapter now in full more. But just so you're aware, Chapter 4 and 5, outside of Laura, probably wouldn't rank this high up. They would probably be around Chapter 2-ish, but she, for me, elevates them to the next fucking level, and I absolutely love it. So her encounters, like I said, are just spectacular. In Chapter 5, you encounter her as a boss fight, where you can't really shoot her to death or kill her with your weapons conventionally. Instead, you find out that her weakness is fire, and there's also horrible lore reasons behind that being her weakness, but we won't go into too much of that. You encounter her, and you have all this this wide area with barrels you can shoot that like explode in fire. There's corpses that if you've saved matches up you can light that she will pop out of, and you can burn her. There's these furnaces you can throw her into. It is just a really cool, fun, intense boss fight with her because she is very fast, she teleports around, and she has an insta-kill attack as like her only attack really. So if she gets you, you're dead. No ifs, ands, or buts, you just die. It makes for a very tense boss fight that is just heart-pounding. Now, like I said, there are also a lot of other cool set pieces involving like enemies in this like that are like underneath this like sludgy sewer water that pop up and you have to deal with, and there's lots of traps you can use to take them down. Like, it's a cool chapter, and it's got good level design. Like I said, it does one of the things that I think this game does amazingly, which is let you approach a lot of the different encounters the way you see fit by having wide open areas to explore and traps to lure enemies towards. So it's very cool, but the main reason we're here is for Laura. And speaking of Laura, Chapter 4 has the introduction to Laura. And before we get into that, we'll just discuss the beginning of it. So, you save Dr. Jimenez, I believe his name is, the town in Chapter 3. And then Chapter 4, you go and go visit like a colleague of his at this place who has gone crazy. And he's sort of like a mini-boss in that he has a fuck ton of health. But it's pretty cool because you can sort of explore around this first area and get a lot of loot and like some ghost encounters. And then you get some very fun enemy design that does not show up I think ever again actually, or if it does, it's very rare, like maybe one other time in the game. But you have these invisible enemies, and in a lot of video games invisible enemies are just annoying and tedious to deal with, but the game is very smart and clever in how they utilize them. Every time that you encounter them, there are environmental things that you can pick up on that tell you where they are and let you feel like a badass when you like pinpoint where they are and manage to hit a shot on the invisible enemy. So, for example, they might nudge like a chair or a table. Like, honestly, I think the invisible enemies in The Evil Within are probably some of, if not the best, invisible enemy designs I've seen in games as well, because they aren't annoying or frustrating, because they aren't overused. They are only used in places that let you deal with them in a very fair and fun way to manipulate your environment. So I really, really like that. But the main thing we're here for outside of those is Laura. So your first encounter with Laura, if you like looked up like a bunch of trailers and stuff like that, this might have gotten spoiled for you, because I think they actually, even before the game came out, had like a first look gameplay trailer which had the set piece with Laura in it, which, to be fair, like, that is a great fucking set piece to show off your new upcoming horror game, because it is awesome. But So you come to like a really slow section of the chapter where there's nothing really happening. You're just sort of waiting on edge for something to happen as you're walking around, and then you go through this long hallway, and you come across this room with this bloody body at the center of the room. And your gamer instincts immediately kick in, and you're like, all right, there's something going up here. So there are gonna be a bunch of enemies that pop up and I have to fight off. You slowly, nervously approach the center of the room, and then there's this fucking horrifying screech or scream that comes from the ground as Laura emerges from the corpse in a fountain of blood and begins to chase you down. And you just like, oh god, we gotta get out of here. The only way you can go is you gotta run back down the hall you came from. You go up to the door's fucking locked, and you can't open it. Like, oh fuck, as she is running down the hall towards you, and then the door gets flung open last second as an enemy like comes out the door, gets killed by Laura, and gives you a window to just run, and then you proceed to have this like running segment where you were just desperately trying to escape her, avoid all these hazards, and like not bump into anything that might slow you down and give her a chance to catch up. I think it's fucking phenomenal. And it makes it so the boss fight you had with her in chapter 5 feels really fucking rewarding, in my humble opinion. Now, the thing is too, you also don't technically have to run with her. If you've hoarded up on supplies, you can actually fight and kill her. It is very difficult to do, but you can like repel her, and you get a bunch of green gel. You can fight her, and it is rewarding to do so. And it does not make her disappear in chapter 5. She, like I said, she simply like retreats because you've done enough damage to her. But yeah, it's I absolutely love it. And here we are now at the final chapter in this video. This is, in my opinion, an absolutely peak chapter. You have two very difficult and intense boss fights with this in this chapter. The first one you have is against that big amalgam bastard that has been throwing wrenches in your plans and been a general thorn in your side that occasionally shows up and just fucks up the scene you're in. You know, you run away from him typically or avoid him in some way, and he disappears quickly, but every time he shows up, he ruins things. So this fight with him is very cool. And very interesting. You're in this massive parking lot full of cars that you can use to hide, and it is partially blind in that it has this giant eye, like tentacle that it uses to see things. So you can sort of sneak around and gradually loot the entire area, and there's a ton of supplies, and you can kind of figure out how you want to go about fighting this guy. You figure out pretty quickly that, alright, you're probably going to want to shoot the eye when it's out, so that means you're going to have to lure it to a section so that it starts looking around, and then be somewhere else that it won't see you, and then shoot its eye whilst it's trying to look around. Once you do that several times, the boss transforms a bit, and then it gets like an eye in its center where this giant mouth shows up, and it is no longer a stealth boss. It is trying to run you down. You gotta fucking stun it, stagger it with whatever means you have, grenades, explosive barrels. Like, you gotta slow it down whilst you just try to just do as much damage as you can, because if it gets close, it will insta-kill you. And it is very intense, and I think it's very cool that it's almost two separate boss encounters in one. And again, like I've said before, it does a great job of having this wide open area for you to really take your time and plan out your approach, because the enemy is mostly blind, like I said. So you can explore around a bit, find the supplies, find these little alcoves you can hide in for a little bit of time, and just take the boss on the way you think makes the most sense, which I think is amazing level design. And it gets even better. So when the amalgam has showed up before, the area around him has always shifted and changed, and you find yourself in these eerie, unsettling hallway, and you're unsure of what to expect. So you begin wandering through these eerie hallways, you know, again, unsure of what's going on and on edge the whole time. And then you hear it. Or rather, you hear her. Laura is back. she's wandering the inside of this weird pseudo cage that's sort of enveloping the entire room you're exploring, and you just know that she won't be there forever. So you're slowly looking around, dreading the moment that she's gonna break free, trying to figure out where to go, gathering supplies. And I will not lie, when I got to this spot, my first time I played through this game, I sat in stunned disbelief and just this slow building dread for 10 minutes, just mouth agape, staring as I slowly just wandered in circles around the room, like, no, we beat her earlier, she's not back, no, we're done, like, we don't have to do this. And then you have another confrontation with her, which is intense and heart pumping. That is a marriage of her, both your encounters in chapter 4 and 5. To start with, she breaks 3, and you have a running sequence where you're solving puzzles whilst she's chasing you down and you're avoiding her, oftentimes using these small traps to slow her down a little bit, or in my case, even using some of your bolts to like stun her temporarily, whilst you're just trying to figure out these puzzles that require you to like turn levers or shoot like these cranks in several different spots, like, which to do so you have to like stand still to shoot and move really slowly. So you have to be very careful when you do it, or else she will grab you and insta-kill you. It is very tense. And then you get to this room where there is an elevator, and you have to decide whether you're going to stand and fight her in this room full of fire hazards that you can try to use to take her on and beat her, or if you're just going to wait and run and hope you can stay alive long enough for the elevator to arrive. And the game lets you choose and decide how you want to play. And the agency is fully in your hands, and it is fucking great. I love that the game does that. If you manage to beat her and fully put her down before the elevator arrives, you get rewarded with a shit ton of green gel. But even if you don't, you're not really punished for it, because once the elevator arrives, you can head straight into it, and you have this really creepy and intense cutscene where you're in the elevator and she's like fucking choking you through the bars before you eventually get the manage to hit the elevator button, and it just cuts her arms off and she dies, and that's it. You don't get any gel for it, but she's gone and she does not come back again, and you have vanquished her that way as well. So I think it's just phenomenal game design, and it is my all-time favorite chapter in the game. I love bosses, and that chapter is just 2 of the best bosses in the game, period, and it is a blast. I can go back and replay that chapter, and every time I do, I have fun with it. It's just an adrenaline-filled ride from start to finish, in my opinion. And there we have it. That was my ranking of the Evil Within chapters. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope that maybe this gave you the push to give the Evil Within a chance. As again, I think it is a underrated classic, and I have had nobody to talk about with this before YouTube, so I am really happy to do so. So, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. Let me know if you did play the game, what some of your favorite chapters are. Maybe you hated some of my favorite chapters. Maybe you loved some of the chapters I hated. Please let me know any of your thoughts, any on the video, any ideas for future tier lists. If you have ideas for horror game things you would like me to see me cover, or if you have ideas for like the Amazing Digital Circus, if you have a specific tier list for that in mind, please let me know. I am 100% open to doing tier lists based on suggestions from you guys, and I think it's fun. So, but all that said, enough rambling at the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed, and until next time, stay healthy.